there is a profound paradox in human relationships. Empaths, those sensitive, sincere, and vibrant souls, are often not loved fully. Instead, they become the target of envy. And the irony is this: that envy does not come from strangers, but from the very people who once claimed to love them, who once swore they needed them, who once said they were an indispensable part of their lives. Why is this so? Why does light so often awaken shadow? This is not just a question of personal feelings. It is an archetypal paradox, a primordial conflict. Carl Jung described as the clash between the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society, and the shadow, the repository of everything we deny and repress. The empath, simply by existing, exposes the gap between these two poles. And in that gap, envy is born. Remember, the empath is not too nice or too weak, as stereotypes suggest. They carry within them a tear from childhood, a spiritual wound that over time has been transfigured into a gift. The child who grew up in a house starved of love, in rooms filled with tension, learned to watch every breath, every frown, every slight shift in tone of voice in order to survive. Out of that pain, the empath was born. They enter adulthood with a kind of psychic antenna, so finely tuned they can sense what others have not yet realized about themselves. But here lies the tragedy. That light is both gift and curse. It makes the empath a torch of illumination, but also an unbearably honest mirror. And we all know, not everyone is ready to look into a mirror that reflects the truth. For mature souls, that light is a blessing, an invitation to turn inward. But for those unprepared, especially those with narcissistic structures, that light is nothing less than an invisible indictment. It declares, you are not authentic, you are performing. You are a black hole wearing the disguise of a human being. Thus, when the narcissist meets the empath, a familiar cycle begins. First comes idealization. They admire that light. They crave to possess it, just as Salieri admired Mozart. They raise you up like a jewel, a trophy to show the world that they too can love, that they too have depth. But soon, when the novelty fades, envy creeps in. What was once adored now becomes an irritant in their eyes. And instead of courageously confronting their emptiness, they take the easier path to devalue, to crush, to turn your light into a fault. Jung emphasized, envy is the shadow's rebellion against the call to individuation. The empath is that very call. They embody the living proof that one can hurt without dying, can be wounded yet remain alive, can walk through darkness and still preserve the soul. And for that reason, the shadow revolts. The narcissist does not envy in the ordinary sense. They do not truly care. They do not see you as a person, but as supply. The brighter you shine, the more they want to consume. The deeper you are, the more they want to possess. And when they fail to fill their endless void with your light, envy turns into a weapon. Devaluation, manipulation, denial. The counterfeit love reveals itself for what it is: a banquet of ashes, a hollow gift, beautiful wrapping around emptiness. Caught in this spiral, the empath often asks in despair, why are the ones I love so cold? Why does the warmth I give never return? The answer is here. Their love has been poisoned by envy. And envy cannot coexist with true love. For true love nourishes, while envy seeks only to destroy. And so our opening question, why do empaths awaken envy in those who pretend to love them, is no longer merely personal, it is archetypal. It belongs to the timeless dramas of humanity. It is the story of Cain and Abel, of Joseph and his brothers, of Mozart and Salieri. It is the eternal tale, light and shadow, soul and void, authenticity and masquerade. In today's video, we will journey deeper into this paradox. From the essence of the empath light, born from wounds, to the mechanics of envy admiration turning into devaluation, to the hollow nature of the narcissist, a black hole in human disguise. And finally, we will uncover the path, how the empath can step out of this tragic cycle, how sensitivity can be transformed from a wound exploited into a sacred calling. For only by understanding this dynamic can the empath move beyond being the victim of envy and become instead the torch that illuminates not only for themselves, but for all who are brave enough to face their own shadows. Part 1. The nature of the empath, light born from wounds. To understand why empaths awaken envy in those who only pretend to love them, we must first return to the root of the empath, who they are and where their light comes from. For an empath is not simply a sweet personality or a moral virtue. An empath is a spiritual phenomenon, the result of early tragedy, and a testament to humanity's transcendent capacity to transform wounds into light. Picture a child growing up in a home where love was not unconditional. It might be a household full of arguments, or one marked by coldness, or perhaps by a silent absence, parents too busy to be emotionally present. That child, in order to survive, had to learn an art of survival, reading the emotional atmosphere. Every glance, every sigh, every subtle shift in tone of voice became a life or death signal. If a parent was angry, the child needed to sense it from afar. If tension filled the room, they had to soothe it immediately. They learned how to tune in, how to dissolve themselves into the environment just to maintain safety. This was not a choice. It was a defense mechanism. But over time, that very mechanism evolved into a kind of spiritual antenna, a capacity for deep perception far beyond the average. And from this, the empath was born. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." For the empath, the pain of childhood was not solved, but outgrown, transformed into a capacity. This is why the empath is both the product of tragedy and the evidence of a soul's maturity. As adults, empaths enter life with the ability to perceive others more deeply than those others can perceive themselves. They hear your words, but they also hear the emptiness in your tone. They see your smile, but they look through your eyes and sense the shadow behind it. They can walk into a room and know immediately when the air is tense, even if no one says a word. For this reason, the empath carries both the power to heal and the risk of continual wounding. To the sincere, the empath is a gift, a friend, a lover, an ally who can understand, support, and walk with you into the darkest corners of your soul. But to those unwilling to face themselves, especially to the narcissist, the empath becomes a dangerous mirror. Remember, every human being exists between two poles: persona, the social mask, and shadow, the denied self. For most, the mask survives by keeping the shadow hidden. But when an empath arrives, that mask is illuminated. The empath's light exposes the cracks. They need not speak a word. Their sensitivity itself is a form of light, and light always reveals shadow. For the mature, such exposure can be an invitation to embark on individuation, to confront the shadow, to become more whole. But for the narcissist who has built an entire life upon masks and disguised that light, is an unbearable indictment. It says, "You are not alive. You are only performing." And so, the empath often becomes the victim of envy. Their vibrancy becomes a thorn in the side of those who are dead inside. Their genuine smile becomes a reminder of another's falseness. Their kindness becomes an invisible accusation against those who have denied their humanity. But note this, the empath is not pure light alone. Jung emphasized that all unbalanced light creates a shadow. For the empath, that shadow is their vulnerability to exploitation, their tendency towards self-sacrifice, their need to be recognized through saving others. This very shadow traps them in the spiral of envy. They give too much, they sacrifice too deeply, and when they are wounded, they still ask, "Was it my fault?" In truth, the essence of the empath is not about pleasing others. Their essence is the capacity to perceive truth. They cannot pretend not to see. They cannot live apart from the emotional currents around them. They are souls born with skin so thin that every vibration of the world leaves an imprint. And for that reason, they become keepers of the flame light distilled from pain. The empath embodies the Jungian principle of the wounded healer archetype. They can heal others precisely because they themselves were wounded. They can walk with you in darkness because they once lived there. Yet, it is for this very reason that they often attract those who are not seeking healing, but only seeking to drink up their light to cover their own emptiness. And here lies the tragic paradox of the empath. Their light is a gift to the world, but it is also the very reason they become the target of envy. Part 2. The mechanism of envy, from admiration to devaluation. If the empath is a star shining with its own inner energy, then the narcissist is a black hole that can only exist by consuming that light. And the spiral between these two poles almost always begins with an illusory stage, idealization. Idealization, when you are placed on a pedestal. At first, when they meet an empath, the narcissist feels as if they have found a treasure. They are dazzled by your gentleness, your kindness, your light. But make no mistake, they do not actually see you. They only see what you reflect back to them. In their eyes, you are like a luxury item, a designer wallet, an expensive suit, a pair of fashionable shoes, an accessory of the soul that makes them appear more radiant. They idealize you not out of love, but because you make them feel a little less empty. You are the fresh paint covering the cracks in their walls. But like every object, that novelty never lasts. When the novelty fades, envy begins to emerge. After the initial admiration, they grow irritated by the very light that once attracted them. Why? Because that light no longer serves as an accessory for their image. It has become a mirror that exposes truth. The more alive you are, the more they feel the deadness within themselves. The more authentic you are, the more false they feel. Here envy begins to quietly awaken. And we must distinguish clearly. Jealousy still wants to possess. Envy only wants to destroy. Carl Jung called this the rebellion of the shadow. The empath, by their very existence, becomes an invitation. Step into your own darkness, confront it, and grow. But the narcissist refuses. They fear the collapse of the mask. They fear their emptiness revealed. And instead of stepping inward, they take the easier path, attacking the light that reminds them of it. The devaluation stage, when love turns into a weapon. From here, sweet words turn into daggers. Affectionate gazes turn cold. What once was praise is twisted into a flaw. You are no longer wonderfully sensitive. You are now too sensitive. You are no longer profound. You are now complicated, dramatic. You are no longer empathetic. You are now weak, fragile. This is the Jungian mechanism of projection. What they cannot bear within themselves, their weakness, their fragility, they project onto you. And you become the mirror that carries it for them. The tragedy is that empaths, conditioned to self-sacrifice, often believe these projections. They begin to ask themselves, am I really too sensitive? Is this my fault? And in that moment, their light begins to flicker. The endless cycle, idealization, devaluation, discard. The relationship falls into a predictable spiral. Admiration. You are lifted up as treasure. Envy. Your light becomes unbearable. Devaluation. You are attacked, made small. Discard. They withdraw or abandon you. But the cycle does not end there. The black hole is never filled. They seek a new star to consume, and the loop repeats. For the empath, this feels like a labyrinth without exit, where they constantly wonder, why am I never enough to be loved? But the truth is this, the problem was never with them. Part 3. The narcissist as black hole, emptiness in human disguise. If in the previous section we saw envy as a psychological mechanism shifting from admiration to devaluation to grasp the full tragedy, we must look deeper into the essence of the narcissist. For they are not merely overly selfish or emotionally greedy. They are, in Jungian terms, a black hole in human disguise. At first, the empath believes they are encountering someone capable of love, because the narcissist is skilled at wearing masks. But that mask is nothing more than a two-way mirror. It reflects back what you yourself long for: your words about love, happiness, and intimacy, your dreams and ideals. In truth, you are not seeing them at all. You are seeing your own image reflected back. Behind that mirror lies no soul, no heart, no empathy, only emptiness. And that emptiness survives by feeding on your life force. When you shine, they consume. When you are weak, they consume. When you disappear, they seek another source. To them, you are not a person, you are fuel. This is why the cycle of idealization to devaluation to discard repeats endlessly. A black hole never knows enough. It idealizes you when your light is new, devalues you when your light begins to expose its emptiness, and discards you when it has drained you. But soon after, it finds another star to swallow. The cycle continues without end. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The narcissist is a living example of this truth. Their shadow has never been brought into the light. They refuse the path of individuation. They will not face the reality of their emptiness, and so their unconscious devours their life. When you enter their orbit, you become the victim of that unacknowledged fate, believing you are loved, when in fact you are being drained to feed an endless shadow. And here we understand why empaths always awaken envy, because they possess what the narcissist never will: a living soul, capable of feeling, of hurting, of loving, of shining from within. And that light, to the black hole, is both temptation and torment. Part 4. Envy, the nature of the shadow. Having seen the narcissist as an empty black hole in human disguise, we must take one more step to understand the energy that sustains that mechanism: envy. Many people confuse envy with jealousy, and this confusion keeps them from recognizing envy's destructive power in relationships. Jealousy still carries the trace of love. It wants to possess, to keep what it fears losing. But envy is altogether different. It does not want to possess, it wants to destroy. Jealousy says, "I want that to be mine." Envy whispers, "If I cannot have it, you should not have it either. If your light hurts me, then your light must go out." This is not merely a personal feeling, but a destructive force. It cannot coexist with true love, for true love seeks to nurture life in the other, while envy seeks only to extinguish it. In Jung's language, envy is a shadow complex. It is born from inner denial. When a person does not dare to acknowledge their own incompleteness, their weakness, their emptiness, their cowardice, they push it down into the unconscious. Then, when they meet an empath, the empath's light awakens what was buried, but instead of facing it, they choose the easier path, projection. They cast their shadow onto the empath. Thus your sensitivity is suddenly labeled weakness. Your kindness becomes naive and foolish. In truth, this is not who you are. It is a distorted copy of their own shadow. The danger is that envy rarely appears openly. It does not step forward and say, "I envy you." It hides in jokes, in cold glances, in sarcastic concern. "You're too sensitive." "I was only joking. Why overthink it?" Yet, to an empath, each word and gesture lands like a small blade, slowly piercing the heart. You feel wounded, but what you hear is the language of love. This contradiction makes the empath doubt themselves. And that is how envy destroys, not by a frontal assault, but by gnawing from within. In myth and religion, envy is one of the oldest shadows. Cain killed Abel not because he lacked goods, but because he could not bear his brother's grace. Joseph's brothers sold him not because he harmed them, but because his dreams were too great. Salieri resented Mozart not because Mozart insulted him, but because Mozart's living genius exposed his ordinariness. These stories endure for millennia because they depict an unchanging archetype. Light always awakens, envy where shadow is unawakened. Jung pointed out that envy is the shadow's rebellion against the call to individuation. Individuation is the journey into one's own darkness in order to become whole. Most people are afraid of this. When they encounter an empath, they are reminded, you too must descend. But they refuse. They choose rebellion. Envy appears as a defense, the scream of the shadow, destroy that light so I won't have to face myself. And if jealousy still leaves a door open for reconciliation, envy slams every door shut. It gives true love no ground on which to live. It turns the banquet into ashes, the smile into a blade, intimacy into a trap. Empaths often dream of being chased, of being pushed underwater, or of sitting at a banquet table full of empty plates. That is the language of the unconscious, warning that envy has entered the relationship and is eating away life from the inside. Why then are empaths always the target? The answer is simple but brutal. Empaths have a living soul. They do not only warm, they also reveal. To those who are ready to mature, that light is a gift. But to those who refuse to look into their darkness, that light is torture. And this is the nature of envy. It does not come from love. It comes from fear of the truth. Part 5. The empath and sacred boundaries from victim to torch. If envy is shadow dressed as love, then the empath's way out is not to try to heal that shadow, but to step out of the role that has bound them all their life, the role of the sacrifice. For years, empaths are nourished on the belief that their value comes from giving, from caring others, from soothing other people's emotional storms. They learn to sacrifice in order to be accepted, to bleed, to prove their love. But as Jung reminded us, sacrifice that springs from unconscious compulsion transforms nothing. It only feeds the shadow. If the empath continues to offer themselves unconsciously, they will only fill another's emptiness and never touch true love. Individuation, in Jung's view, is a return to wholeness, and for the empath it begins by refusing to be the offering. Refusal does not mean closing off or becoming cold. This is where many people are mistaken. They build icy walls and believe that is freedom. In truth, walls block light in both directions. What the empath needs is not a wall, but a sacred boundary like the threshold of a temple where only the worthy may pass. Such a boundary is not for escape, but for protection. Not to reject love, but to guard it from those who only take. With sacred boundaries, the empath learns the art of conscious giving. No longer giving out of fear of abandonment, but giving freely because complete love needs no proof. They listen when they choose, not when compelled. They give love when they have surplus, not when they are depleted. Most importantly, they reserve a portion of their light for themselves. Only when the flame remains can they kindle the flames of others. Here, the wounded healer archetype rises to a new level. The empath still heals, but no longer heals from depletion. They transform wounds into wisdom, pain into energy. Sensitivity ceases to be a burden and becomes a vocation. No longer a doorway for others' shadows to invade, they become a torch-proof that one can pass through darkness and keep the soul intact. And when the empath steps out of the role of sacrifice, they do not become selfish, as the envious accuse. They become free. They no longer live to fill someone else's black hole, but to be faithful to their own soul. They are no longer a victim drained to the last drop, but a torch, a light that does not ask permission to exist and does not apologize for burning bright. This is the decisive turning point, from a naive, easily exploited empath to a mature empath, one who does not lose sensitivity but turns it into strength, one who does not build walls to shut down but erects boundaries to preserve, one who no longer dissolves in sacrifice but radiates in presence. And then, envy is no longer a verdict but a sign that your light is strong enough to awaken another's shadow. At the end of this inquiry, a blazing truth appears. Empaths are not born to be victims of envy, but to be living proof of a soul that can feel pain without collapsing, break without being lost, love without being exploited. Throughout the previous sections, we have seen clearly The narcissist is not a clumsy lover, but a black hole in human disguise. They do not care about you, about love, or about life. They care only about filling an endless void with the energy of others. And so the empath with inner light, vitality, and a sensitive soul becomes the perfect target. Envy is the mechanism that allows that darkness to persist. But envy is not proof that the empath is at fault. Envy is the scream of the shadow when confronted by light. It is the rebellion of the shadow against the call to individuation. When you are envied, it is not a measure of your worth, it is a measure of the other's lack. Jung's lesson to us is this: light needs no permission to shine. But for that light not to be drained, the empath must learn to build sacred boundaries. Not cold walls, but the threshold of the sacred. Not a refusal of love, but a discerning gate through which love is given. Then the empath no longer melts into the role of the sacrifice, but becomes the torch that guides. Remember, you are not selfish when you keep a portion of your light for yourself. You are not cold when you say no to hands that only take. You are not unfeeling when you step out of a relationship saturated with envy. You are being faithful to your soul. And that faithfulness is the heart of individuation, the only path to wholeness. In maturity, the empath realizes, true love does not envy, does not devalue, does not drain. True love rejoices in your shining, because your light awakens the light in others. True love does not fear your darkness, nor uses its own darkness to crush you. True love is rare, but it exists, and you can only recognize it when you no longer mistake envy for love. When you dare to step out of envy's spiral, you step into a different dimension, the realm of authentic love. There, you are no longer a mirror for others to hide behind, but a lamp by which they can see themselves. You are no longer drained, you become the one who lights the fire. You are no longer a victim, but a living testimony that a soul can turn pain into light and wounds into vocation. Here lies the crystallization of the journey, the awakened empath. Awakening does not mean abandoning sensitivity, but elevating it into wisdom. It does not mean ceasing to love, but learning to love with consciousness. It does not mean building walls, but building boundaries. It does not mean pleasing everyone, but living in truth. The narcissist may continue to exist as black holes. Envy may continue to howl, but an empath who has stepped onto the path of individuation will no longer be devoured. They will view envy not as a sentence, but as a signal, a sign that they are shining so brightly that the darkness trembles. If these words touch your soul, remember, you were not born to be fuel for anyone's black hole. You were born to be a torch, and when your light is protected by sacred boundaries, it will never go out. Let your sensitivity cease to be merely a wound and become a calling. Let your love cease to be sacrifice and become choice. Let your life cease to be a role in envy's tragedy and become a witness to the truth. Light cannot be swallowed, only temporarily veiled. If this speaks to you, join us. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with those who need to be reminded that their light deserves protection too. This is more than a YouTube channel. It is a community of souls walking the Jungian path, the path of individuation, the path of turning darkness into light. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. More than anyone, empaths are called to this work.